Hi, I want to welcome you to our first part in a four-part series in answering this question. Do the adult children of an elder need to be faithful? Now, before we even get started, you may be asking, do we really need to answer this question in four parts? And I would say, yes, we do. And what we're going to do in each section is in the first section, we are going to provide an introduction to this question. And we're going to look at some of the different ways people interpret this question and some of the controversy that we see within the church when people are applying this qualification for an elder. And then the second section, what we're going to do is we're going to answer this question in no uncertain terms. We're going to answer it straightforward using good sound reasoning and logic. Do the adult children of an elder need to be faithful? Now, in answering that question, there's going to be some objections. And in the third part, what we're going to do is we're going to answer those objections that people might have to that answer. And in the fourth part, we're going to ask the question, where do we go from here? Does it really matter? And what benefit our interpretation of this question will provide to us? So I ask you not to skip forward, not to jump forward to part 2, 3, or 4 before you watch the previous sections. With that being said, let's get started. Now let's talk about the focus of this study. The focus of this study is an elder and his children, based on 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 4 and 5, and Titus chapter 1, verse 6. Okay? Now, it's a very hyper-focused study on an elder and his children. So as a result of that, this is not necessarily a beginner study. If you're not somebody who has done a deep study on the eldership, you've not really looked at what an elder is, and you're not familiar with all of the qualifications of an elder, then I would recommend you go back and you read 1 Timothy chapter 3, and you read Titus chapter 1, and you look at the role of an elder, and you look at what an elder truly is. And then come back to this study and build off of that foundation. Additionally, as we're hyper-focused on an elder and his children, I want to point out that we are not ignoring the other qualifications. We are not saying that the other qualifications are irrelevant or should be ignored. We're just focused on this qualification in this study. Please do not ignore the other qualifications. Now, our task within this study is to answer this question. Do the adult children of an elder need to be faithful? Now, when we answer this question, we're going to answer it first with book, chapter, and verse. That means we're going to open up the Bible, and it's not going to be my opinion or anyone else's opinion. We're going to look at what the Bible has to say and answer it with a thus saith the Lord. And then when we open up the Bible, we're also going to rightly divide the word of truth. 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15. And by rightly dividing, we're going to use good sound reasoning and logic and make sure we're using the Bible appropriately. And then also what we're going to do is we're going to answer this question in love. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 15 talks about speaking the truth in love. And that's what we're going to do. This study is not to shame anybody. It's not to say that someone's unqualified to be an elder or a church is improperly organized or anything like that. All we're trying to do in our fourth point is in love bring people back to the pattern and say, here's God's pattern, and let's make sure that we follow it. That's simply our task in this four-part series. Now, before we get into the study, what I want to do is I want to take you back to elementary school. I want you to imagine that you're walking in the class, and when you walk in the class, this is what you see written on the board. You see the words pop quiz written on the board. Now, we all get a little nervous when we see the words pop quiz because it means you can't study and there's no preparation. You either know the answer or you don't, right? And so the teacher tells you to pull out a piece of paper, sit down at your desk, and be ready for the pop quiz. And so there you are, nervously pulling out your piece of paper and getting ready. And this is what the teacher writes on the board. 2 plus 2 equals. At this point, you're excited. You know the answer to this question, no doubt, right? And so you write on your piece of paper, 2 plus 2 equals 4. And you're excitingly trying to answer this question. You try to raise your hand, and the teacher tells you to calmly wait for the class to finish. So as the rest of the class finishes up, The teacher looks at you and says, what did you get? And you say, I got 2 plus 2 equals 4. The teacher says, good job, you got the right answer. But then the teacher looks at the student to the other side of you and says, what did you get? And the student says, 2 plus 2 equals 5. And the teacher says, good job, you got the right answer. At this point, you're confused. The teacher said the answer was 4, but the teacher also said the answer was 5. Then the teacher looks to the student at the other side of you and says, what did you get? And the student says 2 plus 2 equals 3. And at this point, you are totally lost. And you raise your hand again and you ask the teacher, how can the answer be 3, 4, and 5? And this is what the teacher tells you. 2 plus 2 equals 4, except when it doesn't. Now, we all know this is nonsense, right? But this correctly frames the question that we are talking about now. An elder and his children. And this is the approach that a lot of folks are taking. They will say that an elder's children need to be faithful, except when they don't. Let's dig into that a little more. So as I've done research on this topic, and I've asked people, what does this qualification really mean? What does it mean in 1 Timothy and Titus about having faithful children? And a lot of people will just straightforwardly say, an elder's children must be faithful. That's great, right? That's like our 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's exactly what the Bible says, very straightforward. But if you pry or you apply specific scenarios to that, you'll start to get other answers. Some people will say an elder's children only need to be faithful when they live in the man's physical home. Okay? Now, you can see that an elder's children must be faithful, and then an elder's children must be faithful only when they live in the physical home are not necessarily the same thing. That's kind of our 2 plus 2 equals 3 and 4. And then some people will kind of go further than that and say, well, an elder's adult children that live under his roof do not need to be faithful. They don't count against him because they're adults. Okay? So again, there's our 2 plus 2 equals 3, 4, and 5. And then people will throw this one in there. An elder needs to have at least a majority of his children faithful. So they'll say that, yes, he needs to have some of his children faithful, but it doesn't have to be all of them. You see, this is the problem that we're running into. This is like being in grade school, and they're saying that there's that 2 plus 2 equals 3, 4, 5, and 6, and so on. We can't add to the Bible. And so what we want to do is we want to look at this question and look at some of the controversy and different approaches, see if we can't get on the same page. Now here's our question. Reading the following texts, okay? I'm going to read these texts. This is 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 4 and 5. One who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? Okay? Titus chapter 1 verse 6. Having faithful children, not accused of dissipation or insubordination. Now, these are pretty straightforward. It says that his children need to be in submission with all reverence. Titus says that his children need to not be accused of dissipation or insubordination. How can we have so many different interpretations? How can so many genuine people have different views, opposing views on this topic? And how can there be so many exemptions from meeting this qualification? So ultimately, that's what they are. When you say that an elder's children need to be faithful, and they say, well, when they're adults, or when they're moved out of the house, or when they're married, or whatever, those are exemptions that we're applying to this qualification. So we want to get to the bottom of that. How can we have so many different interpretations and opposing views and exemptions from meeting this qualification? Now, what a lot of people will say, and what they'll answer the previous slide with is, well, it's a matter of opinion. Well, let's dig into that a little bit. Is this topic of an elder and his children needing to be faithful, is it a matter of opinion? Well, let's just state this. If it is a matter of opinion, then a local church can interpret and implement this qualification as they see appropriate. They can just look at it and say, well, as we interpret it, as we see fit, we want to apply this. So let's talk about that. Is that really how this qualification is listed? Now, let's talk about really what a matter of opinion is. To say something's a matter of opinion is to say that it's based on opinion, okay? And if we define an opinion is a view or judgment formed about something, not necessarily based on fact or knowledge. Let's apply this to the Bible. This means that an area where the Bible gives us freedom to carry something out, we can use that freedom to carry it out as we best see fit, forming an opinion. Okay, so let's give an example of this. Here's an example, okay? Colossians 3:16. Teaching and admonishing one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. Okay? So what is commanded here? Well, we see what's commanded is to sing songs, hymns, and spiritual songs. Okay? Very straightforward. Now, there is some area of opinion in here, and that's how we carry this out, right? We see that it doesn't necessarily say, how do you sing songs and spiritual songs, okay? So many churches will use songbooks. They'll use a PowerPoint. They'll have a song leader that kind of keeps everyone together and chooses the songs and all that stuff. Or we could, think of other ways to do it. Those are the matters of opinion. Now, what is not the matter of opinion? Well, the matter of opinion is not singing songs, hymns, spiritual songs. That is the command. So let's apply this to this qualification as we talk about elders. Again, I want you to kind of go back and read 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7 and 11, and Titus chapter 1, verses 5 through 9. As you do that, I want you to pay close attention to the qualifications for children, okay? Pay close attention to the qualifications for children. Do you really think this is an area where opinion would apply? Truly answer that question. Do you really think this is an area where opinion would apply? So when we're looking at an elder and we're looking at the qualification for his children, again, we're asking, is this a matter of opinion? So here's our question. Do the qualifications for elders give large, broad, sweeping categories to consider when appointing a man? I would say no, because the qualifications for elders are arguably the most detailed, specific, complete, and prescriptive aspect of the entire New Testament. Let's look at an example. I want you to think of worship, okay? And I want you to think about the fact that you will not find in one book in continuous verses that lists the complete acts of worship, how those acts are to be executed, and when those acts are to be executed. If we're going to understand proper biblical worship, we must use almost the entire New Testament to understand how we are to worship God. But when it comes to the qualifications of elders, it's very detailed, very specific, and in one chapter, in continuous verses, 1 Timothy chapter 3 and Titus chapter 1, what we see is it's very detailed and very specific. I would argue it does not give areas of opinion. Now I want you to consider this. What if the text read as this? Find faithful Christian men who are married and have children to serve you as elders. Well, if we look at that, and if that's the way the text read, we have lots of matters of opinion in there, okay? Because it doesn't say that his children need to be faithful. It doesn't say his children need to be in submission. It doesn't say his children need to be not accused of dissipation or insubordination. It just says he needs to have children, okay? So we see lots of matter of opinion there. But when we read the Bible as it's written, 1 Timothy chapter 3, Titus chapter 1, we don't see the text written this way. It's very specific. And so when we look at the text, having faithful children, not accused of dissipation or insubordination, is that specifically stated? We have to say yes. It's very specifically stated. It doesn't give a broad sweeping category of they need to have children. Okay? Now, are there certain qualities his children must have? Yes, his children must be faithful, and they must not be accused of dissipation or insubordination. And that was a third question. Are there certain qualities that children must not have? Yes, children must not be accused of dissipation or insubordination. So keeping everything we just talked about in mind, are the following qualifications or are they opinion? A matter of opinion. Okay, so the first one, an elder must have children. Well, that's specifically stated in the text. Therefore, it must be a qualification. It's not a matter of opinion. And elders' children must be in submission with all reverence. Well, it's clearly stated in the text. Therefore, it must be a qualification. It is not a matter of opinion. And elders' children must be faithful. Well, again, that's listed in the text. Therefore, it has to be a qualification, not a matter of opinion. And lastly, an elder's children must not be accused of dissipation or insubordination. Again, it's listed in the text. It has to be a qualification, not a matter of opinion. I hope we can agree on that. These are not matters of opinion. Again, since the previous statements are taken from the Word of God, they must be qualifications. They cannot be opinions. Here's the point here, and here's something we have to realize if we're going to be consistent. If we say that something so explicitly stated can be an area where opinion can be formed and permitted, how can we hold our ground in other doctrinal areas? Ultimately, we can't. If we're going to say that a text that says a man who's going to be an elder must have children, and they must be faithful, and they must not be accused of dissipation or insubordination, and it's so explicitly stated, and we say, well, there's exemptions to that, then how can we hold our ground in other areas? How can we say that, well, it's singing only? Or that, you know what, well, maybe women can be elders? And so on and so forth. If we're going to be consistent, if something is explicitly stated, we have to follow it. Otherwise, we open a Pandora's box. Now, another thing that some people will say is that the time period of the qualification is an opinion. And so they'll say, well, yes, an elder must have those things, but the time period is the matter of opinion, of when it actually applies to the man. And I want to say that this will be addressed in the second and third sections of the study. We will make sure we address this very thoroughly. And the time period under discussion is in the text and is hiding in plain sight. Most teachers don't point it out, and it's probably not what you think. It does not really have to do with that word household, as many people will say. But the time period is hiding in plain sight. And I think will help you to view this qualification. Now, here's our question. Is there a logical, consistent, rightly divided application of the text? There must be. There must be a logical, consistent, rightly divided application of the text. Why? Number one, God is not the author of confusion. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 33. God did not set out to say, well, this church can interpret this qualification this way, and this church can interpret this qualification this way, and this church can interpret this qualification this way, and so on and so forth. That's not what God set out to do. Also, we have to heed the words of Jesus in John chapter 8, verses 31 and 32. Jesus said, if you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Jesus tells us that we can know the truth. We will know the truth if we continue to stay in his word. And so, with those two things in mind, there has to be a logical, consistent, rightly divided application of the text. It's not a free-for-all where everyone can just interpret the text and apply the text any way they want. Our goal, really, in all of this, is being that the church is so divided and inconsistent on this topic. My prayer and my goal is that this study will bring unity. I'm striving for what Paul talked about in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10. Now I plead with you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing, that there be no divisions among you, that you be perfectly joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment. That's all I want for us. I've been to countless churches. I've listened to countless sermons on this topic, and each church pretty much has its own interpretation of these qualifications. So I want to bring unity. So you've got to go to any church and say their elders are qualified because they properly understand and interpret and apply these qualifications. Now, to do all of this, to bring unity, we do need to, and I include myself in this, we need to put away our prejudices. We need to say, well, I'm just going to look at what the Bible has to say, okay? We need to put away our emotion. A lot of people apply a lot of emotion to this question into their elders and say, well, he's a good man, or well, he had this terrible thing happen to him, or had this terrible thing happen to his family. We need to put away our emotions. We also need to put away our tradition. It doesn't matter if this is the way a church has interpreted these qualifications for a long time. It doesn't matter if this is how your father or your grandfather or so on and so forth interpreted the qualifications this way or that way. Ultimately, what we need to ask is, what does the Bible say? And that's the only way we're going to get unity. If we come around and say, this is what the Bible says, I'm going to do it. Not, here's what I believe, or here's this emotional situation, or here's some tradition, right? We need to come back to the Bible. Now, lastly, we need to talk about this. Does it really matter? You know, some people say, well, just leave people alone and allow them to appoint their own elders how they see fit. It does matter, because in 1 Timothy chapter 1, in verse 13, Paul writes to Timothy and he says, to follow the pattern of sound words which I have delivered to you. The pattern matters. Paul says, Timothy, follow the pattern. And we need to make sure that we are following the pattern that God has laid out for us. Also, a qualified eldership matters. Paul told us this very clearly in 1 Timothy chapter 3. He says, if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? So if we're appointing men that don't know how to rule their house well, they're not going to rule the church well. And the church is going to struggle because of that. So this does matter, and we need to make sure that we are following God's pattern and appointing men who are really qualified and who are going to lead the church well. This concludes the first part in this series. And I ask you to engage with the content on this channel. Comment, like, subscribe to the channel, pass it on to others. The more you do that, the more others will be able to see this type of content. You can also reach out to me if you have questions or you want to talk further about this study. You can reach out to me at BibleAnswersBibleQuestions@gmail.com. Again, BibleAnswersBibleQuestions@gmail.com. I look forward to seeing you in part 2.